I'm Victor Vogel, author of Creating a Bad Guy Free Zone and Creating a Bad Guy Free Zone While Traveling. Today I want to discuss a video I saw on CBS News about teachers carrying firearms in the classroom. But first, I've been studying violence and threat for the last 10 years. I've written 2 books on personal protection against violent threats, and the links to those books will be in the description of this video. I had a license as an armed security officer, and I had a business focusing on personal protection. I was also licensed as an armed private investigator. I've designed and taught a course on personal protection that included video simulated deadly force encounters. I was a Special Forces officer in the United States Army and received extensive firearms training in a variety of weapons, as well as tactical combat training in a special operations unit to include clearing buildings of hostile forces. I want to show you a CBS News report on arming teachers in the classroom. After seeing this video, I want to show and discuss briefly a study on NYPD, one of the most highly trained police forces in the world, and their hit ratios during gunfights. After we review the video and the study, I'm going to offer some comments that are solely my comments and don't represent CBS or anyone else's point of view. I also want to make clear the comments I make will not guarantee 100% the schools will not experience a deadly force encounter. Let's look at the CBS report.
A group that keeps track of school shootings in America says there have been 240 since 2013, about one a week, including one last week at a high school near Spokane, Washington. Some teachers believe the answer is to arm themselves. Others strongly disagree. Nikki Batiste has been looking into this.
Drop your gun!
This is the point of view of an elementary school principal firing at a mock gunman during a simulated school shooting. He's one of more than 1,000 educators from 12 states to take this 3-day firearms course in rural Ohio called Faster Saves Lives.
Nicely done.
He says hitting these targets is preparation for protecting his students.
Shoot a shooter, and what if it's one of your students?
You have to know the important thing is to eliminate the threat and do that at all costs.
Abby Clement's 19 students survived, and now she is one of a dozen Newtown teachers fighting to keep guns out of classrooms.
Never in a million years would I have guessed that one response to what happened in our town would be to arm teachers. It's absurd. God, can you imagine if children were hurt by you in that situation? How would you live with yourself?
In fact, we saw just that scenario play out in this simulated classroom.
During this training, I saw one person shoot what would have been a student in a scenario. When you see that, does it make you second guess this choice to have guns in schools?
No. It's an accident. We might take one, but we might have saved 30, 40 other kids.
Who carries a weapon on them in their classrooms or in their schools?
For this group, carrying a gun in school is optional. Some parents don't know their child's teacher is armed, but others do.
For parents who might support this idea, if you could speak to one, what would you say?
I would say that I understand that you're afraid. I'm afraid too. We have a problem with gun violence in this country, but more guns is not the answer.
Now, before I discuss this video, I want to show you a chart from a study on the New York Police Department hit ratio during gunfights. I will discuss some of the data. A link to this report will be in the description below. Although this report is somewhat dated, the information is still widely used in law enforcement data today. However, much research really still needs to be done on this idea of hit ratios. The information in this report is still accepted as a norm today to understand during deadly force encounters. Let's look at the report. Basically, what you have in front of you is the NYPD gunfight statistics from 1990 to 2000, about a 10-year period. Now across the top you'll notice there's of course the year, and then there's the gunfight hit probability, and then there's the shots fired from a gunfight and shots fired per officer, which means there may have been more than one officer involved in the hit ratio. Okay, so as we go down this list here, starting in 1990, you see the average hit ratio during that period of time was about 19%. So we can see here, for example, 8.2 shots were fired, and it's hard to round a shot off, but statistically about 8 shots were fired, about 4 shots were fired per officer. So in this case you can see there were 2 officers involved in the shooting, and that's probably a realistic thought process, that there's more than one officer responding, but not always more than one officer firing. But we can see here that in many of the cases it certainly was more than one officer, and sometimes more than 2 officers. However, with all of those officers firing, these are the average percentage hit ratios for rounds fired in this report over a 10-year period. As you can see here, 1990 we started 19%, it goes down to 15%, then 17%, and then 15%, 12%, and it really is dropping pretty much, except for a couple of anomalies here, 18% here, 25%, but generally speaking dropping. And what we know here, one of the effects of this might have been the introduction of automatic firearms versus revolvers with six shots at a time. We move up to somewhere between 10 and 15 shots available to an officer per firearm. So more shots might have been fired and than were in the previous years. But regardless of that, the point I really want to make here is when you look at these numbers, what you see right here is less than 25% at its highest, and most of the time much less than 15%, and even into single digits in in the year 2000, with the mean score, the mean hit being 15%. Okay, when you have 15 rounds and you're experiencing a 15% hit ratio, that means for every 15 rounds that are fired, approximately 3 rounds might probably hit the target, and 12 rounds went somewhere else. Okay, they missed the target. Now they may have been close to or around it, or it could be a wide range of area where those rounds went. So depending on the background and circumstances of the situation, behind the target, around the target, etc. But I want you to be aware, this is New York City's police department, one of the most highly trained police departments in the world. This is their hit ratio during a gunfight. Okay, now that we've seen the video and reviewed the report, let me make a few comments, and then I'm going to ask you a few questions. First, given the report reviewed by highly trained police officers who undergo frequent follow-up training, how do you feel about the principal's comment that one student lost is acceptable given it might save other lives? Also, from the CBS report, how do you feel about school system deciding to conduct this training and arming their staff without informing parents of the students in the school? Now let's take a look at the choice of arming teachers to protect your child in school. First, let me explain the difference between arming teachers in school, which is a self-defense approach to the problem of a lone shooter in a school, and protection, which is the concept of preventing a lone shooter from being in the school. Let me start with protection. Protection is preventive in nature. It focuses on ensuring a lone shooter does not have access to students anywhere within the school boundaries. A protection strategy would focus on establishing several perimeters for defense that would identify a potential armed lone shooter prior to entering the school grounds. A perimeter entry point would be designated with armed security guards to clear anyone going into the school grounds. Special IDs would be assigned to parents, children, teachers, and staff. This would be checked prior to entering the school. Next, the second perimeter of protection would be established at the school building's entry point with metal detectors, wand searches, and bag searches for everyone entering the school. Thirdly, random and frequent locker checks will be conducted during the class while students are in class. This is an example of protection. Is it extreme? Yes. It is much like how military protects its military posts. Why does the military go to such extremes? It goes to the extremes because we believe our military to be a target for hostile forces. Today, we need to consider our schools our target of hostile forces, a lone shooter, or possibly terrorists. Is that far-fetched? Obviously not based on the CBS report of the number of shootings in the schools. Is arming teachers not protection? Not really. Particularly not protection since the focus on the arms being concealed. In other words, they hide the arms to have the element of surprise of attack. This means arming teachers is about defending against an attack when it happens. This is self-defense. Self-defense focuses on dealing with a deadly force encounter when it happens. It means you're fighting for your life, not a scenario that has to do with protecting against the attack, but one that focuses on defending against the attack. This is not a case of semantics. Protection is about proactively preventing a lone shooter from entering the school. Self-defense, like armed teachers, is about stopping a lone shooter who has entered the school. As a parent, which solution are you most comfortable with when it comes to your child's life? My final point is for teachers who are deciding that maybe having armed teachers isn't a bad idea, you need to consider you becoming the victim of a lone shooter in a self-defense scenario versus supporting a protection strategy scenario. Secondly, if you are armed and charged with defending your students and you fail to save a student's life, you could be civilly sued by a parent. What would be the cost of that financially? Not to mention your guilt for not saving that student. Secondly, given all I have presented you in this video, do you understand that when a bullet leaves a gun, you cannot call it back? If you kill an innocent bystander, a student, staff, teacher, or responder, you could be held legally liable and civilly liable with severe consequences. Are you ready to accept that responsibility? Have you acquired the insurance to protect you if this happens? Now, lastly, I have a saying I emphasize over and over in my books and video blogs. It's better to protect against a threat than defend your life against an attack. I encourage everyone to get involved in your child's protection at school. Become active and hold your school accountable for informing you of their posture on protecting your child. Demand to know if the school is allowing armed teachers and staff in the school and require their names. Lastly, financially support any taxes or contribute yourself to creating protection strategies that will go a long way to preventing an armed intruder from getting into the school grounds, let alone into the school. I will provide links to my books, blogs, and videos on protection against violence in the description section of this video. Keep in mind, education is one of the best protections against violence. I'm Victor Vogel, and I encourage you to create a bad guy free zone for your school.